Welcome and thank you for joining us for this special guest speaker conversation. Joining us to introduce our speaker is Dr. Bryce Dietrich, Associate Professor of Political Science at Purdue University and Research Scholar for the Center for C-SPAN Scholarship and Engagement. Dr. Dietrich, welcome.
Thank you, Andrea. Jonathan Slapin, who is our guest today, is a professor and chair of political institutions and European government at the University of Zurich. His research includes work on comparative political institutions, parties, legislators, and quantitative content analysis. His work has been published in a number of prestigious outlets such as the American Political Science Review, the American Journal of Political Science, the British Journal of Political Science, international organizations, and world politics, among others. Notably, Jonathan, in collaboration with Sven Oliver Prosch, co-authored the acclaimed book, The Politics of Parliamentary Debate, published by Cambridge University Press, which received numerous accolades, including the Richard Fenno Prize, the Leon Espin Outstanding Book Award, as well as the Jewel Lowenberg and Leon Weaver Prizes. Currently serves as co-editor of the Oxford University Press's Politics Burst series and serves as comparative politics co-editor in Legislative Studies Quarterly. His dedication to research and scholarship continues to shape the study of political institutions and the European government. Finally, I must say that his AJPS article with Sven Oliver Prosch titled Institutional Foundations of Legislative Speech was highly influential to my own work, as well as many others who are interested in legislative speech and floor debates both inside and outside of the United States. And so please join me in welcoming Jonathan Slapin. Dr. Slapin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Let me quickly share my slides here and we can get started. So where do we go? There we go. So you should be able to see my slides now. All right. So first of all, thank you so much for that kind introduction, Bryce. It's a really great honor to have this opportunity to talk with all of you about a topic that's been sort of near and dear to my heart for most of my academic career, and something that I've spent most of my my career studying, legislative speech. I'm going to talk about new directions in the study of legislative speech in a moment, but first I just want to talk a bit about legislative debate generally. Right. So legislative debate can be exciting, raucous, and interesting back and forth, right? Especially in the British context. Here we see a picture of parliamentary question time in the UK, where once a week before cameras, the British Prime Minister faces off against the leader of the opposition, in this case, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, and leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer. The leader of the opposition gets to pepper the prime minister with questions relating to topics of the day. The government and the prime minister has to defend the government's actions. And after about a half an hour of doing this, the question time moves on to the backbenchers. Backbenchers get to ask questions that might be of interest to their constituents, raising constituency concerns on the floor. You'll see that the benches here are packed. Every week they are. The debate between the opposition leader and the prime minister can often get testy and heated, right? And it makes for great parliamentary theater, right? But parliamentary debate doesn't always look like this, right? More often than not, it looks like this. And right here we have Suella Braverman, British Home Secretary, standing up at the same podium and giving a debate to basically nobody. You see that the backbenches are empty. There's one person back there on the government benches checking a cell phone, right? And nonetheless, she's producing the same parliamentary speech as well, right? And so we as political scientists are interested in why, right? Why are some debates raucous? Why are other debates not? Does it matter? How does it matter? How does the message get communicated? Who are these people talking to? And so on, right? what can we learn about politics from looking at this type of debate, and from question times versus regular debate, from government bills versus private member bills, and so on, right? How does legislative speech feature in what we do as researchers and as political scientists? Why do we study it? Or, as I'll talk about in a moment, perhaps not study it. Okay, so to answer these questions, I want to, I'm going to, like I said, I'll eventually get to new directions in study of parliamentary speech, but I want to go back in time first and talk about a bit of history and the historical study of parliamentary debate, how we've studied it over the last several decades, and why patterns of research have changed when it comes to legislative debate. So I'm going to start off by going way back in history, or back to the 19th century anyway, and to a man named Walter Bagehot. Now, perhaps you know who Walter Bagehot is. If you don't, he was a British journalist, liberal, one of the founding editors of The Economist magazine, and also a preeminent scholar of the British Constitution. In fact, in 1867, he wrote the book, The English Constitution, laying out how he saw the development of parliamentary norms and parliamentary politics in England. We can sort of view this work as sort of the British equivalent of sort of the famous Woodrow Wilson volume on the US Congress, written around the same time. Woodrow Wilson was a little bit later, right? And for Walter Bagehot, parliamentary debate was actually quite important, right? Key to what Parliament does. So there's this passage in the book where he writes, "The great scene of debate, the great engine of popular instruction and political controversy is the legislative assembly. A speech there by an eminent statesman is the best means yet known for arousing, enlivening, and teaching a people." Right? So here, Parliament is at the heart of politics. Debate is at the heart of Parliament, and a speech is a way for educating people, right? And enlivening debate, not necessarily within Parliament, but also outside of it. And so one thing to note here is Bagehot clearly sees Parliament as or parliamentary debate as a means for connecting to an outside audience. He actually goes on to say that debate is not about persuading other members of Parliament. It's not. He doesn't expect that this eminent statesman is going to convince other members of his position, but that by talking about these topics, it enlightens the public about the political debate and the topics that are being discussed in Parliament at the time. I imagine here he's envisioning more a debate along the lines of question time than Suella Braverman's talk or speech to no one, right? Okay, but he clearly sees debate as important and as a tool for connecting to people, to citizens outside Parliament as well. Right? Now let's fast forward about 100 years to sort of modern political science and how we've studied parliamentary debate from, say, 1960s, 70s, and until today. And there the answer is that for a long time, we really didn't. So I went back to Legislative Studies Quarterly, the journal which I'm the co-editor, and I'd like to think one of sort of the preeminent journals in the field for this type of work, for work on parliamentary debate and legislative politics. And I went to JSTOR and I did a search of abstracts, and I just simply counted up the number of papers that deal with roll call votes as data and those that deal with parliamentary speech or debate as data. And here we just see that the number of articles on roll call votes vastly outnumber those using speech or debate as data. Something like a little over 90 between 1976 and 2017 on roll call votes, and maybe 20 or so on speeches and debates, right? Most people, most of the time, concentrate on voting, much less on what has been said, right? But that has changed drastically in the last few years, I think. Not that people don't study voting anymore, they obviously still do, but debate has gotten much more attention. So much so that there's a recent Oxford volume, a handbook of sorts, edited by Hannah Beck, Mark Debus, and Jorge Fernandez, dedicated to the topic of legislative debate, politics of legislative debates. Of course, there's this conference here over the last few days, also dedicated to the topic today. I think if we had gone back 10, 15 years, the notion that there would be entire volumes, edited handbooks dedicated to legislative speech, or that we'd have an entire conference about it, it just, wouldn't have happened. And we'll talk about why, right? Okay, so what led to this change? Why did we go from its, from sort of most of political science post-World War II, now not really looking or caring at legislative speech, to over the last 10, 15 years, actually really beginning to dig into it and to maybe go back to the sort of Walter Bagehot position of, oh, this is actually quite important. I think a few things have changed. The first thing that's changed is computing power, right? Now we know that computing power has changed a lot ever since the sort of the dawn of the computer age, right? So this is nothing new. But it's even changed a lot in the last 10 to 15 years. So I have here this sort of silly picture, right? This is the IBM ThinkPad circa 2005, 2006. That was, I think, the model that I had when I was in grad school at UCLA, when Sven Oliver Proksch and I were working on our WordFish model, right? So WordFish was a statistical model that my colleague and I developed, originally not meant to look at parliamentary speech, although we did use it to look at speech in the European Parliament. Originally, we applied it to political manifestos, but political text nonetheless. And when we were writing this code, right, we would write a bit of simple code to create what was called a document feature matrix, sort of the basic data set for looking at text. We'd click go on the code, we'd go get a coffee, we'd get a croissant, maybe work on our dissertation, come back, maybe the thing had run, maybe not, maybe we had a mistake, go do it again, right? And then we'd actually run the statistical model, and days later, we'd get the results, right? Today, you can open up Ken Benoit's Quantata package and run the exact same thing in less than a second. Right? Now, that's not all due to computational power. It's also due to other people writing much better computer code than Ollie and I were capable of writing. But nonetheless, the technology, or the ability to do this sort of work and to work with this sort of data has drastically changed, right? It's worth noting that it takes a lot more computing power to work with text data than it does to work with roll call vote data. And so I think part of the thing that's going on is we now have the ability to process large amounts of text, big corpus, that we just simply couldn't do before, right? Along with that, we have new technology and new methodology that have developed as well. And of course, we have data availability, which in part you guys are part of, right? We have things like the C-SPAN archives making not only available the transcripts, of course, which we have through Thomas, but also the video and audio feeds and all this other great information that we can use to study Congress, right? And not only in Congress, right? I don't study Congress, I study other parliaments. And we have in the UK, a fully digitized Hansard, right? So the parliamentary debate transcripts for British politics. And now you can go to the Hansard, and for any debate for the last 200 plus years, pull up the transcript of the debate, the speaker, if there's a roll call or division associated with the debate, how people voted, right? It's all digitized, it's all linked, it's really nice, right? And we have this not just for the UK, the Hansard for Canada and Australia are digitized as well. And we have a bunch of entrepreneurial political scientists that have oftentimes wrapped these things up in nice R packages so that we can even just suck this stuff right into our statistical software and have links to different corpi, the speeches, the members of parliament that gave them in a really well, if not user-friendly, at least available way, right? That's a tremendous change over even just 5 years ago. All right. So we have more computing power, and along with that, more data and technology and tools to process that data, some of which I'll talk about in a little bit. But I think there's something else that's changed that's perhaps even more important than data availability and computing power. And that is our attitudes towards studying parliamentary debate and political speech. I think we've gone from a world where the question was, why should I care about this? This is all just cheap talk and it doesn't really matter, to one where we say, how cool, why we should all be doing this stuff. I can't even, the number of people that are looking at parliamentary debate has just exploded, right? And this is quite impressive because I think if we go back in time to like 1990, there was even this famous paper by David Austin Smith, a formal model, basically arguing that we can't learn anything from studying parliamentary debate. It's all just cheap talk. If we want to learn about somebody's position, because the notion was that we would use debate to study positioning, we can just look at how they vote. That they can't, members of parliament can't actually reveal anything else or any further information than what would be revealed in a vote through speech, right? And now everybody's looking at it as ways to reveal information. So why did this change? What brought about this change? I think there was a shift in notions about what we can learn from speech and what speech is accomplishing, right? And this shift is that it came about because we came to realize that speech is not debate in the traditional sense, right? We're not trying, members of parliament are not standing up and trying to convince other people within parliament of their position, right? We have to go way back to Walter Bagehot and take a more Bagehot-like perspective that debate is actually about speaking to an outside audience, to voters, right? That this is much more about position taking, with the audience being somebody outside the chamber than somebody inside the chamber. It's a form of communication, right? It's not a form of revealing positions or trying to change somebody else's position. So why this change? I would like to think that I had a little bit of a role to play in this. This is the book that I wrote with Ollie Proksch, which Bryce mentioned at the opening. And in it, we argue precisely this, that we have to, that debate is at the heart of Parliament. If we want to understand what it is that members do and why they take so much time to craft speech, we have to understand who their audience is, that it's likely somebody outside Parliament, and that who gets to give a speech, how parties control speech making, if they do at all, is a function of electoral incentives and institutions. And we show this argument, we show that the nature of partisan control of debate is different, for example, in the UK than it is in Germany, and we relate that back to differences in electoral institutions. Okay, so now we're at a point where people think legislative debate is cool, people view it as a tool of communication. What are the new directions and the new things that are being done in this field? I think there's a bunch of new things that are really quite interesting. New methodologies, data, and technologies. This includes things like the video and audio streams. We've moved beyond just looking at transcripts. Another thing that's really interesting and new is cross-national research that happens in translation. How do we compare, say, speeches in France and Germany and the UK when they occur in different languages, Or I live in Switzerland. Here, politics is multilingual. You can speak in 4 different languages in the parliament, right? How do we deal with that? We can use speech to measure new concepts that might be important in politics, emotion and mood. We can look at these between members of coalition governments, or between the government and the opposition, or between extremist members in parliament and centrists, as I'll talk about in a minute. And so now I'm going to talk about some, I think, research that's been published in the last few years, which does a bunch of these different things in really cool and interesting ways. Right. So one of the ones I think is the paper that I really admire. Now, Bryce, back at you, is Bryce's paper here with Matthew Hayes and Diana O'Brien, looking at vocal pitch to measure as a measure of emotional intensity. Right, different source of data, audio transcripts, and here they capture changes in vocal pitch as a measure of emotion, and show that women members of Congress increase their emotional intensity when talking about women's issues, both compared to male colleagues and when talking about other issues, right? That's a really cool way of using a different type of parliamentary debate data. Another way to measure or to look at the impact of gender in parliament through debate transcripts is in a recent paper by 2 postdocs working in Cologne, Jens Veckley and Bruno Castano Silva. And they look at debate transcripts across a number of West European parliaments, apply machine learning models to show that men and women talk differently, and that this distinctiveness in the way that they talk about politics is both in terms of style and substance. So again, new technologies applied to interesting speech data in a cross-national setting to understand gender and descriptive representation. We think about new technologies, and I mentioned politics in Europe anyway often happens in translation. This is work in political analysis by another former PhD student of mine and now a postdoc in Cologne, Hauke Licht. And he uses a new machine learning tool, multilingual sentence embedding. So if you're familiar with word embeddings, this is a sentence embedding. And he shows how these can be used to study parliamentary debate across languages, and it actually works better than high quality machine translation. So just throwing something into DeepL or now ChatGPT. I said we could use this stuff, use these data to measure new concepts. And here's a paper that does that. And so this is a paper that measures what they call coalition mood. And they look at applause patterns. So in German parliamentary debate transcripts, applause, interjection, are all recorded and in a consistent way. There's guidelines to the parliamentary scribes as to how to mark all of this. And so they are able to take applause patterns and show when one party in a coalition government applauds more for the other party in the coalition government, to try to measure how much in agreement they are at different times during their period of government. And lastly, I mentioned rhetoric and extremists in parliament. And this was a really interesting paper that recently came out in Political Behavior. And what these authors do is they look at how emotion changes in legislative debate when the AfD, a radical right party, enters parliament in German state parliaments. And what they find is that other mainstream parties become more positive in their emotions when the AfD enters, rather than becoming more negative or attacking. And they think that this is because the remaining mainstream politicians try to distance themselves in their rhetoric from radical right discourse. So I think these are all papers that have been published in the last several years, some even within this year, and are really interesting new ways to use new technology and new legislative speech data to capture important concepts that we care about as political scientists. But now I'm going to talk about other directions in legislative speech and another important way to study speech. And that, I think, is that we have to bear in mind what the impact is of the fact that we're observing members of parliament giving these speeches, right? There's an effect of observation. And so at the C-SPAN conference, I'm sure we're all familiar with the story of Newt Gingrich and Tip O'Neill, right? And Newt Gingrich standing up and giving a speech to empty Congress because the cameras are on, and using that as a means of attack, right? The fact that the cameras are there changes his behavior. But this is not at all unique to the US context or to Newt Gingrich. We see this everywhere in the European Parliament and in other settings as well. So I'll give you an example from the European Parliament. This is from a Politico article a few years ago. And the article writes, it does seem like a lot of members of the European Parliament, MEPs, ask pointless questions to get their MEP ranking up, right? This was a website that tracked how many questions people asked and whether they were in attendance and things like that. And it does feel like the quantity of the questions goes up, the quality of the answers and perhaps the quality of the questions as well goes down, right? So one of the more offbeat questions that was posed by John Stuart Agnew, a member of the European, this Eurosceptic Europe and Freedom Democracy group, he asked, quote, "Does water hydrate?" Right. Another offbeat question from Robert Kilroy Silk, another sort of crazy British MEP. Does the Commission attribute the death of culture in France to its absorption into the EU? Or what steps is the Commission taking to prevent German muck spreading being smelt in London? Right? And in a paper that I wrote with Ollie and I, we show that, in fact, Robert Kilroy Silk asked more questions than any other MEP. And oftentimes this was simply to jack up their rating. And we see, if we look at question time, I think there's also a reason why the benches are packed for parliamentary question time in the UK. And when Suella Braverman gives her speech, they're largely empty. We know when people are paying, or members know when people are paying attention. And this is a recent paper in Legislative Studies Quarterly. Again, in fact, it's still in first view, hasn't even, just came, I think, to first view last week, looking at this sort of pattern in Finland, right? And they look at what happens when, during question time, television cameras are introduced in the Finnish parliament. And they find that the effect of television cameras in Finnish parliament is that it increases the government opposition divide. It increases a sort of attack politics between the government and the opposition. It also has it also leads to increased attendance of members. So when they know they're on TV, they attend more. Interestingly, they find that it does not actually lead to a more left-right polarization, but that it might then increase politicians' efforts. Right. And so what does this mean? Well, it means that we have to consider the data generating process, right? What is it that leads members to give a speech? And again, who are their audience? I think this is further evidence that, like Walter Bagehot said, this is about speech to an outside audience more so than to an internal audience. So what are the possible pitfalls that we face going forward? We have all this amazing data, but I always have to caution my students, let's not lose touch with theory. Let's not forget the data generating process, right? We have to remember, why is it that people stand up and give a speech? How does it matter? How does it come to be, right? And this is, I think, important as we move forward. So to conclude, all the new data and technology are really great for research. Great theory and ideas, I think, are even better. And with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I will open up the floor to questions. I certainly have a few of my own. We'll see if anybody else has something that they would like to ask first. Well, I'll get the ball rolling. So one question I've always wanted to ask is, so like in terms of legislative speech, I would say that studies of parliamentary debates are leading the way. Like there's definitely scholars who care about legislative speech in the US Congress, but I would say that they are certainly a minority in terms of folks who care about parliamentary debates, mostly in Europe. So do you think that there's an institutional, is it an institutions question, i.e. there's something unique about parliamentary debates that we cannot find in the US Congress, ergo they're more interesting to research? Or is it mostly just that there just happens to be a scholarly community that is just centered on this, that for whatever reason ended up being grounded in European institutions and they tend to want to study parliamentary debates? I'm sure it's a mixture between the two, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why we don't see as much of a rigorous community when it comes to U.S. Congress.
I think that I think both of those explanations are correct, but I think the big reason why the community developed in Europe is institutional. Not that there's something special about European parliamentary debates, but rather that there's something special about U.S. Congress roll call votes. Namely, that if you want to study parliamentary politics in Europe, we don't have roll call votes, right? By and large, right? And certainly, voting is something that is driven by party, and individuals don't deviate from the party. So there aren't all that many votes to begin with because the outcome of the vote is known a priori. You can just count up how many seats different parties have. And then when there is a recorded vote, again, the number of defections from the party are quite small. And while they may be interesting, they don't really tell you anything about sort of ideology, or, it's not clear what they tell you. And so I think for a long time, scholars of parliamentary democracy looked at Americans and said, oh, you guys can estimate positions of members of Congress by looking at votes. We know how individual members, line up with one another. That's really cool. I wish we could do that in other contexts. We can't. And so, but then all of a sudden, parliamentary speech data becomes available, and it provides us this avenue to look at these new questions. And so I think that's part of the explanation.
Excellent. Thank you. Robert, go ahead.
Yes. Can you think of ways that we could better organize our archive or our legislative speech in a way that might encourage more research? I mean, right now we've got video. We try to organize around speakers with video and audio and text and audio, but is there something that would make it, I got to this question because of what you were saying, roll call votes are so easy. And you obviously do a lot more work with your text, and then when we introduce video, I just wonder what we should be doing.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, I'm probably not the best person to answer that, and that I'm not super familiar with. I have to admit, I'm not super familiar with the archive. I've looked at it a little bit, but I mean, since I don't work on Congress that much, I haven't really delved into it. But what I would say is that the ability to link speeches to votes, to members, to types of debate is key. And so if you can, and to have that available in such a way that you can implement, pull it into a statistical package, most likely R or Python, So I haven't personally worked with audio or video data. Bryce has done a lot more with that than I have, and so I'm personally not familiar with how one pulls those types of files, into software to analyze them. But for me, when I'm looking at for British politics, one of the things that's been, I think, a game changer is that you, in a way that you never could before, you can link individual MPs to particular speeches on a particular day and to the outcome of any roll call vote that was associated with that debate, right? And so it used to be that you could get the parliamentary transcripts, but it was just a list of text, right? And so you couldn't necessarily, it was work to get it to link a speech to a vote or whatever else, and that ability to really have a structured database is a huge game changer.
Okay. Is the Hansard and these other legislative texts, are they accurate? We know in the United States the members can change their remarks, insert, etc.
I think that's a unique feature of the American Congress. I'm not aware of any other place where that's possible. So no, I don't. I'm almost certain that's not the case in the UK. It's definitely not the case in Germany. So there's actually some interesting newspaper articles about and I found a documentary about the parliamentary scribes in Germany and the training that they go through, how they make sure that the stenographers, how they make sure that everything is consistent, and not only consistent across time within a chamber, but is consistent across chambers. So if you actually look at parliamentary debate in Baden-Württemberg and parliamentary debate in Berlin and parliamentary debate in Hamburg, all of the stenographers record it in the exact same way. Which is spectacular. So this whole thing about changing, that's sort of a uniquely American thing.
Thank you.
Yes, Mary Fran, go ahead.
I very much enjoyed your presentation, and I was struck by how many interconnections there are with the discipline of communication. So kind of have two questions for you. Have you worked with, or, were any of the things that you cited in today's presentation, collaborations with scholars in communication? And then secondly, what do you see as potential ways going forward that the discipline of political science could intersect with the discipline of communication? Because I think in many ways, we study similar things, especially those of us who are interested in rhetoric. Andrea, I think, for example, is a rhetorician. I'm not personally, actually. But what are some ways that we could intersect more to build some theory, to continue this fabulous work? I'd just be curious about your thoughts on those two questions.
Yeah, those are great questions. So no, unfortunately, none of the stuff that I talked about today, these were all political scientists working pretty squarely within political science and publishing political science journals. I mean, I have not worked with communication scholars in the past in other universities. There is, however, I would say actually at Zurich, there's a bit more collaboration with communication scholars here than at other places that I've been. And the biggest collaboration that we have is between the people in political science working on social media and digital media and the people in communications working on social media and digital media. So the big social media communications person at Zurich is Esther Hargitay, and she's doing a bunch of work with Fabrizio Gilardi in our department, and that's sort of where the collaboration has been. And I would have to say that at the moment it's been more empirical than I think theoretical. I'm not sure the reason for that. Maybe it's just because maybe at the end of the questions that we ask are somewhat different, and so the theoretical questions are different, but the empirical methods are the same. I'm not really sure. I do think there's definitely ways to learn from one another. I would be really curious to know about this sort of work, especially on rhetoric in communication, that I'm probably not as familiar with as I should be. You know, my hunch is that like political scientists at the end of the day are probably more interested in the questions of like what drives the political process, and communication scholars are more interested in, you know, what sort of rhetoric connects with this, that, or something else. I'm not sure. And so I think we're always sort of fighting these sort of the pillars that are set up by our disciplines. But I think I think there is room for cooperation, and the stuff that I've seen mostly recently has not been in the area of parliamentary debate so much, but more in the area of social media and digital media.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, just to kind of put a shameless plug in for the Center for C-SPAN Scholarship and Engagement, one of the things that we try to do, but it is challenging, is try to get scholars from all different disciplines, you know, to incorporate the C-SPAN archives, but also to work together on projects, because in many ways, I think those kind of interdisciplinary perspectives coming together can really lead to kind of interesting work, potentially theoretical work. So yeah, that's kind of what we're trying to do with the center. And it's still pretty young. I mean, we've been around since 2017, but to build something like this and have it be really interdisciplinary is challenging, but I think can lead to a lot of great stuff going forward.
Yeah, and I'll just,
if anyone else has any questions or comments on it. Robert?
Yeah, I was going to add there that to introduce Mary Fran as the head of the communication department, which is the sponsor of the CCSE and the communication school named after Brian Lamb. But we find that Mary Fran at Purdue itself, and you've just formed a working group, a research group with communication, and I said, well, we got to make sure we get some political science people in there, because with Bryce and Jen and Diana, everybody's sort of going their own direction. And we're not communicating enough internally in our own place. So we need to keep that in mind. I think you raise a good point there.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to that, you know, like you said, we're all in kind of our own pillars and our own silos in the work that we do. And so sometimes we just don't think about reaching out to others, but I just think it could make our work so much more rich. We've done some things though. I mean, with history, political science, potentially other areas. So I'd like to just encourage us all to continue to do that.
Excellent. Any other questions? Well, I think we can conclude. I will say, John, thank you so much. I will say again that the importance of John's work is not just emphasizing text as data. There's a lot of people who are interested in legislative speech as a source of interesting text. But John has really done a fantastic job as advancing the theory that is related to legislative speech, which is obviously important to people who care about things like machine learning. But it really goes without saying that the community of scholars around parliamentary debate, really was motivated by your work. So thank you so much for appearing, and everybody, we should give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been fun.
Yeah,
excellent.
Very good.
Enjoy the conference. Thank you. Bye.
Okay.